So, I've been getting into reading a lot more in the past few years, along with a bunch of my friends, and it turns out there's a lot of good books out there. A couple years ago, I discovered Brandon Sanderson from a couple of my friends' recommendations, and read and listened to the Mistborn audiobook over the course of a couple road trips. Last year, my partner and I read through every single Stormlight book that's currently out. That's up to Wind and Truth. It was an unforgettable journey. That was undoubtedly the best fantasy that I've ever read, but afterwards, she told me this wasn't actually my favorite book this year. I, of course, was surprised, wildly. What could top the payoff of over 4,000 pages? And the answer is a small 200-page cult classic. She asked me to read the book I Who Have Never Known Men, so I put it on my library holds, got it a few months later, and read it over the course of 3 days. This book is like nothing I've ever read before, nothing I've ever experienced before. If you've seen my first video essay about FromSoft and Studio Ghibli, then you might have gleaned that I rely a lot on comparisons in my analysis, but this book, we'll get into it. To start off, let's go over what this book is about. Now, the main point of view character doesn't have a name. Throughout the book, nobody that she's with deigns to give her one, merely referring to her as the child. For this essay, I will either refer to her as the author or the child, depending on context. I'll clearly signpost if I'm ever talking about the actual book author, Jacqueline Hartman, if it comes up. This will also be a relatively long summary. Although it's a short book, it's very dense, and a lot of the subject matter is much more powerful with direct quotes. So without any more delay, let's get into it. To begin the plot summary, this book opens with the author, this being the character the author, making a preface. We are reading an account of her life, and she describes that she is mimicking what she has read in other books. She also describes the ways that she doesn't understand the rationale of the preface. It makes little sense in the world that she came from. Quote, "True, I'm extremely ignorant. Apparently, I know even less of these matters than I thought I did." We are also given some foreshadowing. The name Anthena comes up, as the author thinks about how other prefaces thanked mentors, and she cries for the first time, potentially ever. We don't have much context. For instance, we have no idea how old she is. We do know she has sizable gaps in common knowledge from our era, and she talks about the pain of the cancer in her belly. Is this literal? She does have intense physical pain, so something is going on. My first read through, I had a theory that maybe it was an unwanted child, and was waiting for a large stretch of the book for there to be something to have created that child. We also learn that she gets food from cold storage, that she lives surrounded by books, and that she frequently went on expeditions before her health declined. So what we have here as a reader is a lot of questions. This is a strange opening. Getting a preface from a writer is pretty normal, but it's less frequent for that writer to exist in-world and for it to be a medium to deliver foreshadowing of the upcoming events of the story. This utilization of existing systems to deepen storytelling is masterful and was one of the first hooks that got into me. After the preface, the author begins to recount her life. My memory begins with my anger. This anger coincided with the realization that she was different from the other women she was surrounded by. Quickly, it is established that the child is a prisoner within a cell along with 39 other women. She is the youngest and knows no world other than this prison. The women she's with remember the calamity and being taken, but not how they got there. The child was born very close to the calamity and is the youngest in the cell by a wide margin. The child becomes aware of herself through the frustration of her differences. She never met her mother. She didn't go through puberty as the others did, and she doesn't menstruate, which causes a great sense of frustration and anger in her, even though the others say that she should be grateful, but not why. It feels like a secret is being kept from her, and that there's a clear division that divides her from the others. Before we go any further, let's go over what normal life in the cell is like. The 40 women are given food and water at regular intervals, cloth for clothes, and mattresses to sleep on, but no privacy is allowed. Everything must be done with an eye line of the guards. There are 6 total guards broken into 2 groups of 3 who rotate shifts at somewhat regular intervals. They all present as masculine, which happens to be the child's only window into seeing men firsthand. The other women have stories of husbands, boyfriends, sons, or brothers, but this is all the child has seen with her own eyes. The guards tirelessly perform their duties and never speak to any of the prisoners. They prevent any attempt at escape, even suicide. They are armed with guns and whips, of which they only use the whips if the women break a rule, like touching one another. To not mince words, this is inordinate cruelty that strips the women of all basic freedoms. Now, during this time, the child is growing up. Even if puberty hasn't hit, she still finds herself having romantic and sexual feelings towards one of the younger guards, although she doesn't have the context or language to understand what this is. Quote, "He was the only one of our 6 jailers who wasn't old and decrepit, and I was probably indulgent because I'd never met any other young men. I tried to imagine our conversations. In a past I hadn't known. Will it be fine again tomorrow? Have you seen next door's kittens? I hear your aunt's going on holiday," but I'd never seen kittens, and I had absolutely no idea what fine weather might be, which put an end to my reverie. The child then thought of interrogations, which had never happened here, but which she heard of from the other woman. Quote, "I thought, if they were interrogations, he'd come and get me, and I'd leave this room where I've always lived. He'd drag me down unknown corridors, and then something would happen. My mind worked incredibly fast. The boy was propelling me along with seeming dedication to his job, but once we rounded a corner and we were out of sight, he stopped, turned to me, smiled, and said, 'Don't be afraid.' And then he took me in his arms, and an immense sensation surged through me. An overwhelming eruption, an extraordinary burst of light exploding inside of me. I couldn't breathe. And then I breathed again, because it was desperately brief." These eruptions, the intense but fleeting moments of euphoria and pleasure, became a main source of joy and comfort for the child. The other women knew so much about the outside world that they kept from her, but they didn't have this. The child, keeping the secret to herself, would antagonize the other woman, who noticed her change in demeanor and tried to pry the secret of why out of her. In interactions with the other women, the child showed that even without schooling, she had sharp wits. She realized that, other than societal convention, there was nothing that would force her to say anything about what she was experiencing. The guards would prevent any physical confrontation, and there weren't any carrots or sticks the other woman could leverage to get her to open up about what she was experiencing. The only thing that they could use was ostracization, which she already felt. This is accentuated when the child continues to ponder on the situation the other women are in while they were making a meal. Quote, "They bustled around chatting. This was the first time I'd listened closely, and I was surprised at how much they had to say, the passion with which they repeated the same thing in 10 different ways, as to avoid accepting that they'd absolutely nothing to say to one another for ages. But human beings need to speak, otherwise they lose their humanity, as I've realized these past few years. And gradually, I began to feel sorry for those women determined to carry on living, pretending they were active and making decisions in the prison where they were locked up forever, from which death was now the only release." End quote. A main theme of this work is, when heavy constraints are put onto us, how can we lead our lives, and what are the things we choose to or are able to preserve? This is one of the first instances of the child grappling with this. The women chose to preserve their mealtime ruminations. Even if it was the same conversation to be had countless times, the tradition must continue. Eventually, the author and Anthena, the least hostile of the other women, have more conversations. Anthena goes into how hard it was to care for the child for the first few years after being put inside the cell. The guards don't permit touching, so many of the natural instincts to comfort had to be suppressed. This cruelty affected both the other woman and the author. It built resentment in the author, who saw the other woman as uncaring and detached from her, othering her, which isn't wrong, but man, their options for comfort were limited, and the child was such a reminder of what had been lost, as well as the horrors of their current situation. Not interacting had to be for the best, right? Anthena and the child build more rapport, and Anthena starts properly schooling her on as much as she can remember. This leads to math, which leads to keeping time. The child learns to keep time by listening to her heartbeat and comparing it to the other women's menstrual cycles, and comes to a realization. The guards are working about a 16-hour per day schedule. Her ability to tell time and to gain a modicum of freedom back was enough grounds to start building camaraderie of resistance with the other women. It became a unifying point that all the imprisoned could share, an example of reclaiming what had previously been mundane, and the child stopped seeing them as her enemies. Shortly after this new normal settled in, the event happened. Suddenly, one day, when the guards were in the process of unlocking the door to deliver the day's food, a siren began sounding. The guards immediately ran, but they left the keys in the lock. The child quickly used the keys to unlock the door and exit the cage, prompting the other woman to do so as well, and they began to explore the facility. It was at this point in the book that I was sure that this was some sort of obtuse human experiment. That they were all still on the rails. The chances that a key would be in the lock at the exact moment seemed so low, and everything about the guards and their imprisonment up to this point just didn't make any sense otherwise. As they explored, they found the facility was empty of the guards. This was the child's first time out of the room with the cell, so she saw many things that she hadn't seen before. Tables, chairs, and they quickly found a long staircase. Apparently they had been underground, and the woman with the child racing ahead at the lead ascended them. They were expecting some sort of fight, some resistance, but instead they made it to a hatch at the top, which opened into a cabin in the middle of some very empty plains. There was no other infrastructure, no power lines, no vehicles, no roads, and no clue where the guards went. It was decided quickly that they would need to travel to find civilization. I noticed I was wearing the same thing as somebody watching, and we can't both wear the same thing, so I had to change. Now we should be good to continue. Some of the women, the child at the forefront, went back to the cabin to gather supplies. They found a large walk-in freezer that was still running and absolutely stocked with food. There's leftover clothes and boots from the guards, but not enough for everyone, and there were more questions. Were they at risk of being pursued? What would they find out there? Is this even Earth with, the hours of the day being off? They pick a direction and set off after going back into the facility a couple more times to get more supplies. It was slow going since some of the women were over 70 and not used to this much physical activity, being in the cell all day. That set their pace. While outside, the child was also asked to recalculate her internal clock, starting at sunrise to sunset, which they realize takes 22 and a half hours. It's close enough to 24 that this still could be Earth. I mean, it's an inexact measurement. But on top of this, during one of the first nights, Anthena isn't able to find any of the constellations she knows. This, again, could be human error, but what if it's not? The child also gets her first experience of being outside as well. They find a river and she learns about swimming. There are birds in the sky, and the breeze is ever present. It's truly a wonder. From here, they travel for 27 days before finding something. It's another cabin, very similar to the one they left from. When they venture inside, the interior is eerily similar, and there was a nasty smell that only got stronger the further in they went. Quote, "We reached the bottom. The huge double wooden doors were open, as in our own prison the day the siren went off. I stepped inside and stopped dead, paralyzed with horror. It was the half-light of nighttime, but I could see the cage. The floor was strewn with dead women. They were in frightful attitudes, tormented, their mouths open, their fists clenched, as if they'd fought and killed one another in the madness from which death had snatched them. They died of grief long before the hunger had killed them. Without food, ferocious and desperate, how many days had they spent clawing at the bars with their remaining strength, trying to pick open the locks without any keys or tools, their fingers bleeding, trying to achieve the impossible, sick, crazed, laying down exhausted, and then getting up again to attack the steel with their bare hands, screaming, crying, dazed, sometimes recovering their wits to contemplate their fate, and flee it in fury. The utter lack of humanity on display here is staggering, and the description is harrowing. What kind of government or organization would do something like this? First, to have all freedom stripped of you, anything you associate with your identity other than your body, imprisoned with no knowledge of why or whom for decades, then suddenly let to die slowly of hungering after some unknowable event doomed you to a slow, hopeless end. The desperation is palpable in the air, and it's an utterly horrific scene. In the cage, there were 40 women as well. The woman of the first bunker tried and failed to pry open the cell door to give them a proper burial, so instead, they sealed the doors to the room holding the cage and held a ceremony. Then it was time to take stock. The rest of the bunker was exactly the same as the first one, including the boots left behind by guards and the meat locker full of food. It was clear that they wouldn't be running out of food anytime soon. So, after stocking up again, they set off and only found more of these bunkers. The next one they found held men, and they too had been left to die. The men had tried to pry out the plumbing to make tools, leaving twisted pipes and tipped porcelain, but the task was impossible. The pipes uncooperative. Without any equipment, they all died. This became a routine, going from bunker to bunker to find 40 dead, caged bodies, holding a vigil, then restocking from the bunker, and continuing on. This went on for 2 years. There were still more questions than answers, but they would have to wait. The oldest of the women, Dorothy, couldn't continue walking. They didn't have unlimited time. Quote, "There's no point in waiting," she said. "I'm old. I must be over 75, and my heart won't get any stronger. We must go on." But they couldn't leave her, so they fashioned her a stretcher using materials from the bunkers. We nailed branches across the 2 wooden poles so that we could carry her lying down. She thanked us profusely and told us that she felt better, but we could see that she was short on breath, and while we moved, she kept her eyes shut most of the time. Anthena said that she'd fallen into a light coma. Some of the women wanted to stop, but Dorothy woke up and wouldn't hear of it. "If you stop, I'll say to myself, half an hour later we might have found something, and I'd die angry. I want to keep going until my last breath." And that was how Dorothy died, gently rocked by the woman while Andina walked beside her, holding her hand. After a while, she could no longer feel her pulse. I saw tears trickling down her cheeks. "It's over," she said. The others caught up with us and walked until sunset. 39 women and a corpse, a long, straggling column crossed the plain. A silent procession through which the impossible unwillingly taking possession of the void, alongside the stubborn woman whose wish it had been to die without stopping. From that time on, I was fully aware that one day I would be the last. Alright, I'm taking a pit stop here for analysis. These 2 ways of dying, trapped in a cell or requiring movement, both impacted me greatly. Both are crowned by uncertainty. In one case, where did the guards go? How could they just leave us after all this time? Why like this? And in the other, will they manage all right without me? Will they find civilization? What happens if they don't? Death is the ending of possibility, to set in stone something that had the potential for change, and to force those close to the dead to confront their own mortality. At least, until it becomes routine. Next, Mary Jane went. She developed a horrible stomach pain and ended up committing suicide after she realized she wasn't going to get better. She snuck from camp when the others were sleeping and hung herself from the bars of a cage, becoming the 41st of its dead. After discovering her, they laid her to rest, closed the doors, and moved on. At this point, the momentum that had carried them from bunker to bunker the last few years had died as well. They found a river that was near a bunker and settled down, making stone homes. The author would continue to make supply runs to further bunkers when needed, but the answers to the mysteries surrounding their situation still eluded her. It felt like she was the only one who wanted to seek them out, but being unwilling to leave the others, she kept herself busy by inventing and building useful things. She did enjoy the challenge of seeing a problem and being able to come up with a solution on her own. Fortunately, there weren't many challenges at this point that needed solving. They had food, they had shelter, company, and running water nearby. It was enough. As the women settled into this routine, many of them paired off and became lovers. The child noticed and took interest, as she didn't have any knowledge of this. She then went to the woman who had taught her so much already back when they were in the cell, Anthena. Anthena let her know what women could do together, which begged the question, what were men for? Of which Anthena was hesitant to answer. Quote, "What's the use of telling you? There's no more men." Anger flared up inside of me. But I was no longer a little girl among women. However old I'd been at the start, we'd been out for 7 years now, and I was certainly over 20. I was one of the women who had organized communal life. I didn't want to be treated like a child. Because I want to know. Sometimes you can't use what you know, but that's not what counts most. I want to know everything there is to know, not because there's any use, but purely for the pleasure of knowing. And now I demand that you teach me everything you know, even if I'll never be able to use it. And don't forget, I'm the youngest. One day I'll probably be the last, and I might need to know things for reasons I can't imagine today. End quote. Anthena was convinced and taught the author everything she knew about genitals, sex, all of it. I noticed that whoever's wearing the same thing as me decided to change, so thank you. I can wear this again. Anyway, puberty had halted for her, and she didn't have periods. It was like her body had known that there were no men, that having a womb would have been useless. After this, she latched onto grammar and fought every scrap of literacy that she could out of the other woman. Even if there were no more books, it was a good use of her time. And as time moved on, year after year, more of the women died due to old age or medical complications. They moved camp once because the closest bunker's food supply started running low, and the child heard more about the world the others came from. They were much more open to talking to about it now, and she felt very disconnected from it. Quote, Gradually, I stopped asking them to tell me about their world, and I gave up trying to imagine it. I knew very well that I came from it. I'd had a father and a mother who probably went dancing and got married or left each other, and were torn apart by the disaster like Francis and Lawrence. All of the links between them and me had been severed. There is no continuity, and the world I have come from is utterly foreign to me. I haven't heard its music, I haven't seen its paintings, I haven't read its books, except for the handful I found in this refuge, and of which I understand little. I know only the stony pain, wandering, and the gradual loss of hope. I am the sterile offspring of a race about which I know nothing, not even whether it has become extinct. Such thoughts ought to make me weep, but tears never come to my eyes except when I think about Anthena, a woman I actually knew. I cannot mourn for what I have not known. End quote. And with this, we have reached the heart of the matter. This quote, this passage, and another nearer to the end are the main ones that lay things bare, to me at least. The impact that the death of a culture has on the generations afterwards, and how a culture can be killed, coupled with the weight of uncertainty and the inability to leave a legacy. From here, we will move faster through the rest of the book. As the next woman became bedridden, Angela, she stated she didn't want to deteriorate like Margaret had, that somebody should finish her. Anthena was afraid she wouldn't have the heart to do so, so the child stepped up, stating, "I'm not like the rest of you." Angela ended up passing on her own, but they all remembered the child's resolve. And as food ran out in their bunker, they moved to another and rebuilt their homes again. At this point, every woman was in a relationship with another, and there was even one trio. The child wanted to keep exploring. There were still so many questions. Were there more survivors out there? How was the power staying on in each facility? But she didn't expect anyone else would want to keep moving, so she kept it to herself. She could continue when they were all gone. And they did go, with many requiring her help. Anna was the first when she was paralyzed down one side of her body. Anthena tried but couldn't muster up the ability to take another's life, so she showed the child exactly where to stab, right in the heart. Quote, "They all went out of the house where Anna lay, and I was left alone with her. I sat beside her. She looked at me, and I saw, on what remained of her face, that she was trying to smile at me. I drew back the blanket from her emaciated chest, and had no difficulty counting the protruding ribs, nor in locating the edge of the sternum. She raised the arm she was still able to move, stroking my cheek while I placed on her skin the point of the knife that I had spent ages sharpening. It was swift and accurate. Her arm fell back, and her heart was beating no more. I received that caress several times, the only one I was able to tolerate, the silent gratitude of a woman receiving death at my hands. None wanted to endure pain, and I think they were in a hurry to die. I don't know how many I killed, I who count everything. That was the one thing I did not count. I saw their tormented faces relax as I was about to strike. And it didn't make me cry because I sensed their haste and relief. My hand never trembled. We became strange accomplices during those last moments, where I was the chosen companion, the one who would unravel their incomprehensible fate, closer than the forgotten lovers, dead in the bunkers or under another sky, closer than the weeping lovers waiting at the door for me to come out, and nod my head confirming that it was all over, that the sick woman's suffering was at an end, and that, at least for one of us, the agony was over." End quote. The way the author thinks of death is so honest, so intimate that it's frightening. The necessity of her role is tragic, that due to limited resources and dwindling hope, once quality of life begins to decline, the best thing to have happen is the child putting you down. It's so fundamentally sad that the one who will be the last is the one who carries the knife and the burden of being the final mercy, and that she feels closest to each of these women at the moment they are to cross over. The number of women quickly dwindled down here to 6, and almost everyone except the child has health complications. This includes Anthena, the woman who has taught her the most and who has cared for her the most. She could no longer walk, and she could no longer take it. Each death seemed to weigh on Anthena more than the other women, taking a moment to assume what was in her head. She studied medicine, but doesn't have any of the equipment needed to help with preventable injuries, or to make life livable for those terminally ill to the point where the child needs to kill them because she doesn't have the heart to take on that burden herself. It's been decades and they still haven't found anything or anyone out here other than copies of the same prison that they came from, with so many dead. And her body is now failing her. Seeing her slow decline is one of the biggest tragedies this book holds, which is capstoned by the last interaction she has with the child. Quote, "She'd grown so thin that I could lift her easily. I covered her well because she'd become very sensitive to the cold, and we bade each other good night, but I could hear her crying, and I was unable to sleep. I went over and sat on the edge of her bed. She asked me to hold her hand. She knew how much I hated touching anyone, and I understood that if she was asking me to overcome my revulsion, it was because she desperately needed this pitiful contact. You know you're going to end up alone," she said. I often thought about it. How will you survive? I'll move on. I'll carry on looking. If it had been up to me, I'd never have stopped, but I could see that the others couldn't go on anymore. They talked back and forth a little more, and Thena asked the child to cradle her in her arms, a considerable last request due to the child's aversion to touching, but one that is necessary, and the child is sure she's able to hide the weight of the effort. And Thena told the child, "I have loved you so much," and she stayed with Thena until the end. Quote, "I wasn't afraid of falling asleep, and I concentrated my attention on her ebbing life. I don't know exactly when she stopped breathing. We were both so tranquil and silent. Death is sometimes so discreet that it steals in noiselessly, stays only for a moment, and carries off its prey. And I didn't notice the change. When I was certain it was all over, I lay there a long time, holding her to me as she had wanted. It was all I could do." End quote. Alright, we're on to Laura. At this point, it was only 4 left, which, over the course of 3 years, dwindled down to 2. The child and Laura. Laura and the author were never particularly close. The only other time Laura is mentioned by name is when the author is discussing which women had the longest hair, but now it was just the 2 of them as the sole survivors of the community. The author at this point felt like she was only going through the motions. With only 2, there's still enough people to be called a community, and with that, the need to remain together, and Laura had no intention or want to go to uncover the mysteries of the world. In fact, it seemed as though Laura didn't have much intention on anything now that everybody was gone. Quote, "As I spoke to her, I was thinking that I'd have to go on an expedition because we were running out of soap too, but I held back from saying so. I was only talking for the sake of it, frightened by her expression that was so vacant, so absent, that she looked as if she was asleep with her eyes open. She started violently, turned her head towards me, and, as she told me before, must have seen only a vague shape. 'Oh, it's you, child,' she said, as if she'd forgotten that there were only the 2 of us left. 'You're a good girl. I'm not much help to you.' Laura's lover had died years ago, and she seemed shattered from the amount of loss that she'd been through. Now she was just waiting for her own death. Lost." Quote, "Do you think I'll live much longer?" she asked. I thought back to the days when I'd been furious and full of contempt, when I'd had the impression that they were laughing at me, that I knew nothing and they knew everything, and I found it heartrending to see that Laura was now consulting me as if I were an oracle. She just stood there, not knowing what to do with her body. 'Do you feel ill?' I had been so slow to reply that she must have forgotten her question. She looked taken aback, struggled to think, and nodded. 'I'm tired, but everyone's tired, aren't they?' 'Everyone. The 2 of us.' 'Yes. Everyone,' I replied calmly. If she didn't remember that everyone was dead, why remind her?" End quote. The explicit inflection point that the child has gone from the youngest one with the least knowledge to the one synonymous with death, and is now the one who would know when it is close. This feeling, coupled with the sense that there is more out there, it was something the child had to express. Quote, I sat down in front of Laura. I sincerely wanted to say some helpful words that would sustain her, but to be honest, in this sterile land, in the silence and solitude, ignorant and sterile myself, what could I give her? Why should she want to live? We were doing nothing. We were going nowhere. We were nobody. You see, I said to her, I want to go off exploring, and I don't want to end my days here, eating canned food only for it to come out again later. She looked up. You could see that she was trying very hard to understand what I was talking about. Then, to help her, I said, I'm going off exploring. But there's nothing, she said, surprised. Only the bunkers. Thinking was a great effort for her. There aren't even seasons. We don't know. We gave up too soon. We searched only for 2 years, didn't we? It was because of the old woman. We had to keep stopping so they could die in peace, and sometimes they took such a long time. They kept feeling better, and then we thought they'd recover. I want to leave. I'm not old. Wait, she said. Wait. I shan't be long. She understood me. We both knew that she couldn't cope on her own, that she wouldn't have the strength to go and get food from the bunkers or gather enough wood for her fire, and that I couldn't abandon her. This passage hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt seen in a way that I wasn't expecting, and that felt extremely uncomfortable. If you've lived with someone who's terminally ill and not getting better at a time of transition in your life, then I hope you'll understand. There's a feeling that there's so much potential in front of you, but instead of being able to chase it, you're needed elsewhere. The bonds of love or community become the chains of others. I remember one car ride with a close friend where I blurted out, I feel like my life is on pause until Mom passes. And I felt horrible for saying it. I loved my mom, and I wanted her to live so badly, but she just wasn't getting better, and she was in so much pain, and nothing could change while we were in that holding pattern. The worst part of terminal illnesses like cancer is the way that it breaks somebody down and makes them feel guilty about it, makes them feel guilty about having to ask for help. To see the strong-willed, smart, and hilarious woman lose each of those aspects as the illness progressed, the change was slow enough that the realizations of what the new normals were hit you in stages, and by the end, the only thing to do was to wait. Quote, there was a moment when everything was as if suspended. I could see clearly that the little artery in her wrist was still beating, but I was certain Laura was dead. Her breathing was soft and regular, with an automatic rhythm that was unable to stop. But she was no longer thinking, and as the sun touched the horizon, her wrist stood out clearly in the evening light, and I saw there was no movement under her white skin. I let out a deep sigh. My last tie had been cut. End quote. It's clear I was far closer to my mom than the author was with Laura, but Laura's death was also the death of the community of women. She was the last tie the author had with them, and now the author was free for her great pursuit. After my mom passed, I was much more tied up with what she left behind. A house full of things and probate. So please, if you own anything substantial, write a will. You don't want to put your loved ones through that. But once I got to start pursuing my path again, I feel like things went similarly to the author. With all ties cut and Laura gone, the adventure continues. I remember the first time I read this book, I had been stuck on, where did the guards go? Is this Earth? What is the purpose of the bunkers? To the point that when the women settled down, I was frustrated by the lack of answers. As I went back through the book, I find the profound moments of humanity during the period of the child within the community of women to be incredibly moving and thought-provoking. Even just the nature of the death rituals that they create. In our daily life, we want to imbue death with meaning so badly. to give form to the formless abyss. In most media, someone's death usually coincides with a significant point in the story to spur a character to action, to amplify the stakes of a situation by making things feel more real, or to show the consequences of actions taken. In life, this often isn't the case. For me, death has either come as a gut punch delivered over the phone, or as a slow, inevitable force bearing down on someone as their ability to live independently is stolen from them by disease. There is no action to be spared, no stakes to be amplified, and no consequences of any actions other than a higher being if you believe in one. There's just the void that once held a person, and the question, what do we do now? What will things look like without them? Sometimes, in the most broken moments, there is relief that the person is no longer suffering, and that your life can continue. That the void that held their form transforms into the opportunity of what can come ahead. This book shows an understanding of death more profound than what I ever want to know, but it resonates with what I do. With the child as the last and only, nothing can happen but the journey continuing. At this point, the author buries the last of the dead, and begins her journey again. Something has shifted, though. For Laura, she didn't leave a grave sign. There was nobody else to tell. The night before leaving, sleep was difficult due to excitement, and she woke up early to pack. No longer beholden to anyone else's schedule, she set off early and went until she was tired. The first bunker she reached was anticlimactic for her. She had forgotten how similar they all were, and although there were some rare foods like powdered oranges, nothing else was out of the ordinary. In fact, there were only very rarely things out of the ordinary in the bunkers. The food differed as if they all came from the same space stock but had been given out in different orders, and sometimes items like waterproof sheets would be on the table. Why did the guards have no personal belongings? The author came to the theory that the guards had been as much in the dark as the prisoners, forced to do a job they didn't understand, and this revelation excited her. Finally, an answer, even if it only brought more questions. From here, she sought to find something big, maybe the power plant that had to be running the bunkers, or a place where they had received their orders from. Instead, she found what looked like a road, which was very strange. Up to this point, there had been nothing similar to that in the entire area. It was always just bunkers. So, after finding this road, she walked on it for a while, until she found a hunk of metal resembling a bus. It was old and rusted, and inside there were 23 bodies, all sitting neatly in their seats. All were skeletons wearing uniforms and gas masks. Death seemed to have struck instantly, to the point where the driver's hands were still on the steering wheel. I mean, talk about a discovery. Now what the hell happened? Each guard had a pack with the same items: a jacket, a packet of dried up food, a razor, a glass bottle, 2 towels, 2 pairs of underwear, a blanket, and a book. The guards also had their uniforms, which were identical to the ones the guards in the prison wore. The aforementioned gas masks, which didn't seem to save them from whatever calamity struck them, and they also wore whips and pistols. These guards seemed to be a dark mirror, where the author and her fellows had survived by sheer chance, a key happening to be in a lock. These men seemed only to have died because they were away from their facilities when whatever happened happened. The book that they all had was on gardening, on specifically grafting roses. Perfectly useless, but the author thought the knowledge as an ornamental jewel. From here, she buried the dead men over the course of 3 days. Then, with more questions in the need of answering, she continued down the road in the middle of nowhere. She followed it for a long while, finding many cabins to the sides, with the same facilities below, until one day the road seemed to vanish. It didn't really vanish, but ended in a gradual manner. The author searched for days to see if she had missed something, but no, it then became another mystery. Why build a road to nowhere? Where had the guards been going, and where did they come from? At this point, the author changed exploration strategy. Instead of walking in a straight line, she started going in scything curves to explore more ground. Pretty quickly after the change in strategy, she found that each cabin was built in relation to 4 others, one at each edge of a rectangle, and one in the center. Upon making this discovery, she thought, quote, "This world was like a jigsaw puzzle. I had only a few pieces which didn't fit together, end quote, and she was about to find her last piece. One night, the author saw an unusual mound of rocks. In all her years traveling, she never saw them stacked like this, so she investigated. After carefully moving them, she discovered a hatch. Down the hatch was a spiral staircase, and the author's first light switch, which she had to grope around in the dark for. Down the staircase was some sort of safe house. There were cans of food lining the walls, and multiple rooms, one of which was a very well-furnished study. This place was filled with so many new discoveries that the author had to take it slow. The excitement was far too much for her to handle after so many questions. So, with a good amount of stopping and starting, she took stock of where she was. There was a separate room for a bathroom with a bath and hot water. There was a kitchen with a microwave and an oven and a hot plate. There was also a cold storage, which was better stocked than any of the prisons. In the study, there was rich wood paneling, a carpeted floor, luxurious armchairs, a bed with pillows, and many books including some Shakespeare, Don Quixote, and an elementary treatise on astronautics. Little of which the author understood given how much of the context she lacked. She found paper and writing utensils in the study as well, which she began using to draw maps and to organize routes. Lastly, the author found a mirror in the bathroom, in which she saw her proper reflection for the first time in her life. She spent hours looking at herself, seeing what she looked like, making each facial expression. From here, she decided the bunker would be her home base for excursions, which she would live in for another 22 years. During that time, she made another 50 excursions, none of which showed her anything more than bunkers with the trapped dead. During the last trip, her resolve finally broke. She thought about what would happen if she actually did find other survivors, about the greater cage they would have all found themselves in, and how they would have questions that she still didn't have answers for. So she went home and started writing instead. She wasn't done with hope, but she would approach it another way. Maybe one day another person would find this bunker and her accounts, and maybe it would provide some answers that they needed. She wouldn't be able to figure them out as her time was running short. Turns out the cancer in her belly mentioned at the start of the book was literal, and the author planned to commit suicide after finishing the book. The pain was becoming too much. The author figures that she has a cancer of the sexual organs. After losing a lot of blood while going to the bathroom, the symptoms were very similar to Mary Jane's, the woman who hung herself as the pain had been too great. And the pain affected the author in the same manner. More than half the time, the pain robbed her of enjoyment, and the other half she was too weak to appreciate the relief. With only her thoughts and the looming death approaching, the author thought about the dead talking in Hamlet. How could that be possible? And also about what Anthena tried to teach her on Christianity, about the Lord and spirits. During the nights of the time writing the account of her life, the author would go to leave the bunker and watch the night sky while reflecting about how there must be someone else that escaped, with how many bunkers there are, but how improbable it would be. Quote, "Sometimes I used to sit under the sky on a clear night and gaze at the stars, saying in my croaky voice, 'Lord, if you're up there somewhere and you aren't too busy, come and say a few words to me, because I'm very lonely, and it would make me so happy.' Nothing happened, so I reckon that humanity, which I wonder whether I belong to, really had a very vivid imagination." End quote. This is the quote that has stuck with me the longest after reading the book. What God has become in the twilight of the last human, how the purpose of comfort and the promises of life after death both ring hollow, stripped from the culture, and now how that religion is living only as a misunderstood memory. That was one of the last times the author had the strength to leave the bunker. As she grew weaker, she began to eat less and less. She thought about how she wanted to die, to be kneeling, looking onward, facing oblivion. The last words in the book are, quote, "It is strange. I am dying from a diseased womb. I who never had periods and who have never known men." End quote. It's not only strange, but poetic in a morbid way, that the womb, what's usually a symbol of motherhood and childbirth, something that does nothing for most of the author's life due to her stunted puberty is what makes her life unbearable at the end. It doesn't feel like narrative coincidence that the organ that creates new life is what's diseased, but that disease also caused the author to write this account, to stay close to the bunker, to ruminate on her own mortality, as well as recount her story, her legacy. Her legacy isn't in who she birthed, but in what she created, and it will stay with me for the rest of my days. And with that, we're done with the recap. That was lengthy, but the book is dense and poignant. There's actually another section near the end that I wanted to go over, where the author ruminates about the nature of time as a shared measurement and how little importance it has when she's alone, but I didn't feel like my ability to recount it was doing it justice, so instead I'll just plead one last time to please read this book. Take it out from the library, either physically or over an app like Livy, or just buy it. It recently had a nice collector's edition come out. It really is worth your time. Anyway, we now can get into part 2, the analysis. First, I'm going to be breaking down the elements that make this book feel so unique. After that, I'll attempt to conduct some of my favorite type of analysis, comparative analysis, and then I think I'm going to be looking at the outstanding questions that the book posits that we should strive to answer when thinking through it. So, let's get into the core components that make up this story, and also which make it unique. First, we have the type of community the characters exist within. This is an eclectic group of women with varied nationalities, experiences, and ages, with the only thing in common being their internment for at least 15 years with virtually no freedoms. Second, there is the uniqueness of our point of view character. We have a social outcast who never knew the world everyone else belonged to, and due to this, for most of her life, doesn't feel like she has something required to be human. The third is the uniqueness and implications of the setting. This includes the cruelty of the guards, followed by the perceived freedom of the outside world, which turns out to be an even larger cage, and also the inhumanity required to create the setting. Fourth is the nature of the struggle that the author and her community find themselves in. They are the last generation. The chance of there being other survivors is low to none. And so, with that, what's the point of life? What does it mean that they are the last? And also, the author ends up as the last of the last. How does she change when there are no others around? Fifth is the puzzle without enough pieces. Where did the guards go? Why were they here? Is this Earth? Why a gardening book? Who was the bunker for? Where does the power come from? And how much does answering these questions actually matter? And lastly, we have the ways in which many of the darkest, most intimate moments reinforce the narrative. This includes foreshadowing within the sorrow of the foreword, or the way in which Laura's death is essentially a waiting room both the author and the reader must wait in before journeying onwards for answers. I feel that these 6 points are the most distilled pieces that I haven't seen another form of media capture, and with each taken away, we get a very different feeling from a narrative. I have some examples from some of the more impactful stories I've experienced recently that I think do a good job of showcasing this, and I think that we should start with one about a very tortured author. Alright, full candidness, I've been looking for an excuse to talk about this game for a long while, and I'll probably come back to it at some point when I feel like I can get the whole spotlight, but I also think that there are clear parallels that I would be remiss not to explore. For those not in the know, Alan Wake 2 is an investigative, story-driven game where you play as 2 characters on parallel journeys. The one that we will be putting more focus on for this analysis is the namesake of the game, Alan Wake, who is a writer.
Sorry, what?
Both him and the author are, well, authors. The author only ever made one book, which was the final act of her life, and she got an immense amount of catharsis from the act of re-examining that life. To Alan, this couldn't be further from his experience. In fiction, he wrote a popular series of crime thrillers called Alex Casey, but after the series concluded, he got a serious case of writer's block. His wife Alice booked a vacation in Bright Falls, Washington, where, through the events of the first game, he became trapped at the bottom of a lake in a liminal dream space that's affected by his writing. Alan went from writing being his entire world to it being a detriment not just to him, but also to the world around him. as another presence at the bottom of the lake, known as the Dark Presence, wants to use him and his understanding of the greater world to escape. So, we have two authors, one who gains healing and self-discovery through writing, and the other who loses himself more and more through isolation over the project. I, for one, have felt both of these throughout my creative processes. The more time I tend to spend with something, the less I feel like I can comprehend it fully. The closeness makes my perspective skewed in a way where it becomes far too large. Because of this, Alan Wake 2 also has another main character outside of the story that Alan is trapped in, Saga Anderson. She's an investigator with the FBI, and she's here in Bright Falls 13 years after the events of the first game to solve a strange string of murders. So, now that the stage is set, let's use the 6-point framework to do some analysis. First, we have the type of community. Alan Wake 2 hosts a few. Alan himself is trapped in near isolation and needs to project himself into the story he's writing to find an escape. There is a small cast of other characters like Ati the janitor, Tom the filmmaker, who I'm pretty sure was a poet in the first game, and Warland Dorr, who has some of the best sections of the game.
He is tormented by his dark doppelganger and guided by visions of a fictional detective he has written. That's right, Alex Casey is in this book as well.
There are also recordings from Alan's wife, Alice, as well as a couple others, but I deem them unimportant to the video. Most of the time, though, Alan is alone with only distorted shadows that echo his name as he wanders through the otherwise empty streets of New York.
Alan Wake. The darkness inside. These are my words. It was never your story.
It's hauntingly creepy and shows that, for Alan, writing is simply pain. Pain that leads to discoveries, but each of those discoveries is paid for through stress, trauma, and leave him feeling more like a husk of himself. Again, this is a far cry from the author, who only ever writes one account as far as we know, and that process is both healing and cathartic. Outside the Dark Place, the small towns of Bright Falls and Watery have a much larger cast with a small amount of overlap. Interestingly, the retirement home in Act 3 of Saga's story has many characters from Alan Wake 1, 13 years later. This provides a unique sense of an insular community. We also have Rose, a significant younger caretaker, who is also a protector and executioner, who has been close to these characters for the duration of their time here. I do actually think this relation is very fun to examine, so I'm going to do more of it. Both Rose and the child are A, the youngest, and B, the only people who are seeking the deeper truth of a world. Also C, social outcasts. The great community of Bright Falls views Rose as somebody who's not all there, which is distinct from how the child is viewed by the other women as far as we know. The main difference here is that Rose is living entirely in a fantasy. We get a view into her point of view through the Night Springs DLC, where we learn that she gets a lot of enjoyment from fanfiction level stories, simple plots with brooding bad boys and happy endings.
Only a monster could be blind to the poignance of my writer's books. And there's only one way to deal with monsters. Whoops! Gotta put more bullets in.
She's a hopeless romantic, and that romance is the reason why she does everything. She even kept the cardboard cutout from the first game for 13 years. She's wholeheartedly dedicated to Alan, and her belief that this is what he wants her to do is the main driving force in her life. If we turn to the child, we see she doesn't have the cultural context at her core, and she is very motivated by knowledge, not faith. There isn't the specter of a higher being at play, like with Alan, and instead the child seeks to get as much knowledge from what's around her as she can, since it's what she finds passion from. For her, understanding is the key. So, okay, on to Component 2, the uniqueness of our point of view character. Alan Wake 2 has two of these. We have Saga Anderson and Alan Wake. Saga is one of the two FBI agents sent to Bright Falls to investigate a series of killings near Cauldron Lake. She's also a mother who is very present in her daughter's life, despite the distance her cases take her on, and she's very good friends with her partner Alex Casey. Saga, like the child, is driven by knowledge and a need to understand. Part of her gameplay is to go to a mind place to put all of the pieces of a mystery together. The mystery Saga has in front of her at first seems to not have enough pieces, and if it was a traditional case, then none of these would fit together correctly. But Saga makes some serious leaps in logic with very concrete faith, seems to know things she has no right to have any knowledge of through imagining conversations with the people that she's investigating. So, how does Saga compare to the child here? While both are great analyzers, to the point where I think the child would have made an amazing detective in another life. Outside of this, both are outcasts in their narratives. The child's through age and Saga through having a different memory than everyone else. See, for some reason, the people in Bright Falls seem to know Saga, even though she's never been to this town before. In fact, she also has her own trailer here, and apparently her daughter, who she was talking to in the first cinematic, died in the lake years ago. Saga's main motivation from here on is to figure out what happened to make reality different than what she remembered, and to make sure her daughter is safe. This makes her at odds with everyone who thinks they already know her, and are really weirded out by her sudden erratic behavior. It's also interesting that Saga's main motivation is tied to her motherhood, while for the child, that's never even an option. It puts a pretty distinct wall between them. Swapping over to Alan, he has been trapped in isolation for the past 13 years. His life is desperately trying to find enough answers to escape his situation. On the surface, it's very similar to the authors, who after 22 years in the secret bunker, is still looking for the truths of the world. And in the dark place, Alan is very much an outcast, but here is also a very strange place. The bottom of the lake wants things from Alan. It wants to use him to learn and to escape. Unlike the author, he has cultural understanding of the world he came from, but that's what's being used to keep him in isolation. Alan also doesn't feel human. Being in the dark place has affected him. The song Lost at Sea, which plays during one of the game's end of chapter sections, is pretty clearly referencing Alan's state of being. Lost in the dark, he can't even see his own form. He can't tell if the lights that he sees down there are a lighthouse or the reflection of his glowing eyes. What a monster. Lost in the dark, he can't even see his own form. It's another dark mirror with the author, where one realizes her humanity through reflection, while the other loses it through isolation. This also gets into an interesting tangent of what people have the capacity to create depending on both the state that they're in and the ways the world around them affect their sense of self, but the script is already very long, so I'm gonna have to let this point drop. The last point I have on this is both Alan and the author can only escape their situations through writing. To Alan, writing is something that hurts others. He had promised to stop writing, vowed it to himself, but he forgot, and he needs to get out so badly that hurting others is the only way. He can't stay here. While on the other hand, the author has nobody left to listen, and she's hurting so badly, all she can do is make her account and hope that somebody sees it someday. Moving on to number 3, we have the uniqueness of the setting, including the cruelty and inhumanity on display. Continuing where we left Alan, actually, we'll start with the author then. She was initially in a closed world, which opened into something much grander, and also revealed itself to be a larger cage. Alan, on the other hand, is not okay. Similar to the other women the author was imprisoned with, a calamity caused him to be imprisoned, but he is in near isolation and needs a lifeline. The Dark Place and the guards or organization both are swathed in questions. For the Dark Place, where did it come from? Why does it work in spirals? How long has this been happening? What are the limits to what it can imitate? While the guards and whatever organization is behind them beg the questions of why these women? Why the rules of no touching? Where did the guards go? How can this building run with no power? And what made them able to enact this cruelty? Speaking of cruelty, for both, we have that enacted without explanation or full understanding of reasoning. In terms of our point of view character actions, Alan is trapped in the same small cage over and over, writing story after story, hoping that in one of them, the guard will drop their keys outside of his cell, but is never able to get there until he finds help from Saga. Speaking of which, I have less to say on Saga specifically for this point, due to her not being imprisoned like the other two. Most of what she deals with is self-doubt, and the strength to refuse what she knows isn't true, which I'm not able to map as cleanly onto this point. Maybe somebody else has something, but I got nothing. Number 4, the nature of the struggle. For Alan, his struggle is personal, confusing both to him and the player, and has large ramifications on those near him. There is a direct antagonist in the form of the Dark Presence that wants to use him to escape from the lake and affect the real world. It preys on his understanding of story structure to force a price to be paid for any progress, and since Alan is writing the story, is he also the antagonist? He was supposed to stop writing after all. I mean, everything would have been fine if he stopped, but then he would still be trapped alone, and that's no good. This type of isolated struggle is something the author went through as well when she was searching for the bunkers alone for 22 years. Eventually, she gave up on finding an answer and turned to writing when she realized that finding other people was pointless. Well, she wouldn't have been able to share any answers with them anyway. And once she gave up on solving the greater puzzle, she found both solace and regret in the life she lived. Alan's struggle is swapped. It began with his determination to find solace and him being racked with regret, but he didn't end, and his continuity meant that he could change. But alone, this change wasn't good. It turned him into someone manic and desperate, and it isn't until Saga puts the pieces of the puzzle together that he's able to take a step back and see what he's trapped in. Speaking of which, Saga also has her own struggle. As Alan tries to write his way out of the dark place, it affects the world around Bright Falls to the point where, in his narrative, Saga used to live there, and of course, went through tragedy. In this version of reality, Saga's daughter died by drowning in the lake. Many people Saga meets act as if, she already met them in the past, and have only condolences. Meanwhile, she's trying to solve this damn case to see if it'll fix things to how they should be. The parallels of the author are more tenuous here, but they both are out of step with everyone else in their worlds. In Saga's case, she can't conform to what she knows not to be true, since it's too horrible to imagine. But for the author, she chooses to follow her community, as to do otherwise would mean isolation. The author could have left to find answers on her own, or with a smaller group, maybe with just Anthena, but chose not to. And who knows, maybe if she set off when she was younger, she could have found other survivors, or more answers. Something tangible. But the point is, it's impossible to know. Of course, the author didn't have the same type of knowledge Saga had as well. It goes to show that each character had agency and made choices to either maintain or rebuke their community, and each of their situations are compounded by unknown elements that make each choice something character-defining. Number 5, the puzzle without enough pieces. We've had bits and pieces from previous parts, but let's pull them together. Saga and Alan both need to enter the unknown to find answers. With the normal alone, Saga's pieces won't fit together. She needs to follow the words of a manuscript from an author who's been missing for 13 years. If she wants a chance at understanding what's behind what's happening in Bright Falls and Cauldron Lake, she puts the pieces together in her mind place, where you get to see conspiracy board type view of multiple puzzles, and Saga does get to put all of the pieces together through the course of the game. She's not alone. She can and does leverage other people to solve this case, unlike the author who only has herself. Even when the others were alive, they only cared to look for about 2 years, before, one after another, they started getting old or sick. If we look at Alan's mystery, it's much more cerebral. It involves unclear information that, even after finishing the game twice, has plenty of loose ends that don't quite fit together perfectly. For instance, what exactly is Dr. Darling doing in the Dark Place? What happened to Tom the Poet? Was he ever even real? What about Tom the Filmmaker? And Ati? But these aren't necessary for a feeling of conclusion and catharsis after your second playthrough. Alan Wake 2 has an ending, and these mysteries don't need to be solved to get there. This is similar to the author. There were questions that weren't able to be answered even after all her searching, so she found her own catharsis in knowing that she was human through re-examining her life. That time spent in her community was worthwhile, and that solving the mysteries of the world wouldn't have been worth abandoning her community for them. Finally, to number 6, the way that the story's structure impacts the understanding of its events. Alan Wake 2 is actually a great example of this. The way that you're given information is handled in a way where you always have enough information to theorize, ponder, and wonder. Just to reiterate, my main example in I Who Have Never Known Men was the use of the preface, something that's usually mundane in most books, as a way to show that the author has a lot of gaps in her knowledge, and to get a glimpse at where the author ends up. It gets you thinking about what sort of chain of events has led to this, while you have very little information. Alan Wake 2 doesn't do something that drastic, but it does have you start as a naked man on the shore of a lake, after some very striking imagery of a dead moose. You are then hunted down, shot, and your heart is ripped out in a ritualistic killing.
Hemingway. We're starting now. On the cold of the tree, watching the lights.
There's a lot of questions here. Who were you? Who shot you? What is going on? And why were there jump scares like a Rorschach test? The manuscript pages you find in Saga's story also give a bit more foreshadowing into upcoming events, as well as the insight into how certain characters think. But I think more of these story structure moments are present on Alan's side, specifically on In Between with Warland Door.
Yeah, thank you for one of the strangest interviews of my entire career, Alan. All this talk of meta-narratives. You have to expect them to disappear once this seed ends.
Here is a fact that is heard to follow.
And also, in each chapter's finale, Saga and Alan's actually have similar characters doing similar things. There is foreshadowing. Hey, the foreshadowing's really cool. You gotta trust me. It's like a really good game. You should play it. These are great ways to bring up so many questions. And just to throw more questions at you, because I know that's what you want. Who is this man? Did Alan or the Dark Place make him? Why does he want Alan to know about projecting himself into a dark New York? Why a musical?
From what I've gathered, you grew up nice and sheltered with mama's pretty stories and your own made-up fury. And mama gave me a magic clicker. Well, yes, I think it's true and fair to say.
There's so much going on, and I love all of it. Alan Wake 2 is also incredibly striking on a second playthrough when you see the ways the pieces fit together, and you see what still doesn't quite make it. Plus, you get a few additional pieces just to make things a little bit... yeah. There isn't a scene exactly like Laura's in this book, but there is something that hits similarly. Pat Main, the charismatic radio show host from Alan Wake 1, still has his show in the second game, but he's old and his memory is slipping very badly. It's not fully clear if this is due to the effects of Alan's story in the Dark Place, or if he just is developing bad memory issues, but he keeps swearing that someone who died during the events of the first game is still around selling beef jerky at the weekly market. Like Laura, this is the type of characterization, a slow loss of independence and identity that I don't see often in other media, and that I feel was handled very well here. Imagine if you had played Alan Wake 1, a game carried by its ensemble cast, including Pat, with very real banter.
Welcome back to KBF FM. Hope you enjoyed that tune. Now, Doc, you were talking about life and finding that special someone, that soulmate.
Well, you were talking about that. I was saying I don't buy it. The idea that there's that one special person out there for you, and if you miss that chance, it's gone forever and you're forever incomplete. I mean, isn't that depressing? Or heck, childish even? Hey, there's plenty of fish in the sea.
And apparently a fisherman has a fishing analogy for everything. But let me say something personal here.
Okay.
Now, well, I don't disagree with you exactly, but I can't really fit that together with what I feel, what I felt for someone, because she was the one. She was. And I let her drift away from me. Maybe I didn't put in the work, I don't know, but, well, since then, and it was a long time ago, but since then there hasn't been anyone, not like her. And I'm not saying I dwell on her or haven't moved on. I like my life. I'm not living in the past, but I do miss the way she completed me. I'm sorry, folks. I had kind of a scary experience last night, and let's just say it's shaken a few things loose.
And you're so excited to hear him in the second game. I mean, he was one of the biggest highlights that built out the world of the first game. Someone who made Bright Falls. But then...
For those of you just tuning in, you're listening to the Pat Main Radio Hour, brought to you by Davis Family Moose Jerky. And boy, what an eventful day here in Bright Falls. By now, we've all seen the FBI setting up shop in town, and I'm sure you're all asking the same question I am. Did they bring all this darn rain with them? Deerfest is right around the corner, and we're all crossing our fingers for sunshine. So I reached out to our top meteorologist for a weather update. She never responded, but I have her uncle Tapio on the line from Watery. Tapio, are you there?
Yes?
Great. And Tapio, what kind of weather can we expect today?
Rain.
That definitely seems to be on the menu. How about over the next week?
Also rain.
Right. Care to elaborate? Any chance the sun will poke out in time for Deerfest?
No.
Well, Deerfest is coming, rain or shine. And that parade lineup is looking dandy as ever.
As time goes on...
And who was selling beef jerky in that stall next to yours? Wendy Davis. Davis Family Beef Jerky. Now, how can she be selling me beef jerky on Sunday and be missing since 2010? It's ridiculous. Okay, that was Jim Figamore, everybody, and he'll be running for mayor this, wait, no, that was, anyway, that's our show for today. Anyway, here's another song from Kathy's grandson, Daryl.
I do find myself thinking more and more about Laura and Pat in relation to my mom. How oftentimes we remember people at their worst since that's the last time that we saw them, heard them, instead of at their most lively. It's heavy stuff, and I'm glad that I'm not alone in experiencing it. It makes me feel more human. Alright, with that, we've reached the end of my Alan Wake analysis. I feel like we've gotten more insight into the book, but we didn't find a clear one-to-one mapping. Although Alan Wake 2 plays with similar themes, there are significant gaps and differences that change the tones of each work substantially. Maybe instead of a writer, we need to find a narrative about a lone explorer. So, let's hop into Outer Wilds. What is Outer Wilds? Before we get into it, I need to let you know Outer Wilds is one of my favorite games, so I really don't want to spoil it for anybody else. The first time I played through it drew so many strong emotions and will honestly stay with me in a way that I don't think many other pieces of media will. It is a game built on the nature of discovery, so knowing less about the events and the plot going in means that you'll get a lot more out of the experience. A playthrough takes between 20 and 30 hours, and a lot of the time some people will bounce off the game due to just not having clear expectations, or they're just not really sure what to do. But once you solve your first mystery, most people are hooked for the rest of the playtime. T. Helms actually made a great video on the topic where he interviewed the creative director Alex Beecham, so yeah, you should really give that a watch. It deserves more views. So, just to be clear, just like I, who have never known men, I recommend you give this game a shot before I talk about it. I won't be spoiling everything, but there are discussions of late discoveries that will affect the emotional beats of a first playthrough. And with that, let's get into it. So, what is it? Outer Wilds is a space exploration time-based puzzle game where you play as an incredibly hardy alien called a Harthian, whose society recently created a translation system for an even older alien's writing system. As the newest member of their burgeoning astronaut program, you are tasked with exploring the ruins of these ancient alien structures to discover more about the neighbors you never got to meet. The game takes liberties with realism. Planets are much too small for the gravity they exert, and the way that they're put together is honestly insane. And also you can find air anywhere a tree grows. But all of this leads to a very unique Pacific Northwest adventure feeling that mixes surprisingly well with kind of a taped together NASA space exploration feel. Hell, your spaceship has a ton of wooden components that you can repair with duct tape and a prayer. On the surface, there's some pretty obvious parallels to I Who Have Never Known Men. You have a unique individual in a community who alone is searching for the truths of a world. You also have a plot filled with the bodies of the long dead, and stakes as high as extinction for the species. I remember when reading through I Who Have Never Known Men, the feelings I had at the ending were similar to some of the ones that I had during the course of Outer Wilds, so I feel like there's more to at least exploring the similarities. So let's go through our points of comparison. First, we have the type of group or point of view character finds themselves with. The Harthian lives in a settlement on the home planet of Timber Hearth. There's enough people here to have a wide set of vocations, and there's still people being born. We have Harthians of multiple generations, the youngest of which you can play hide and seek with. We also have a main character that is uniquely explorative, but their exploration is done for the sake of the community, not despite it, unlike in I Who Have Never Known Men. In Outer Wilds, there is agreement that the knowledge is worth knowing, and that simply living life isn't enough when there are questions to be answered, compared to the child's exploration where the woman of the community, due to age, multiple illnesses, or the relief of comfort after interment, decided that seeking answers wasn't worth the price of constant movement. The support for the exploration is night and day. In Outer Wilds, it allows the Harthian to search for knowledge, while the community they came from is still mostly alive. Although something is definitely wrong. We'll get to that shortly. Second, we have the uniqueness of our point of view characters. In Outer Wilds, and this is a spoiler for one of the earlier reveals, we have someone who is unique among their peers. There are other astronauts, but each of them stick to a single planet or the moon of Timber Hearth for their observations or research. None of them have the translator that you have, or the drive to see these mysteries through. They also don't have the ability to come back from death. You see, early in the game, your Harthian comes into contact with a statue, which does something. After that, whenever the Harthian dies, they see their own memories rewind until they wake up again, in front of the campfire. This is the same place that the game initially starts. You can even talk to the nearby NPC about what's happening, but of course he doesn't believe you. Who would? So, the Harthian is uniquely cut off from the rest of their kind. This has minor overlap with the author. Both are lone explorers who feel separate from their communities and who can uniquely look for the truth of their worlds. But one is definitely far more supernatural in its elements. For number 3, we have the uniqueness and implications of each setting. So I've left something out of Outer Wilds up to this point. I said the Harthian comes back if they die, but that begs the question, couldn't they just live life carefully and avoid death? Well, no. Since about 16 minutes after waking up, the sun of their solar system seems to go nova. So we have a very unique problem with weird implications. We, of course, need to find a way to stop the star from going nova to save our community, and hopefully the answer as to how lies within the alien ruins. I mean, they probably knew something, right? They had a space station rotating around the sun. I mean, they were advanced. But, and here is another spoiler warning, so please, if you have any interest in the game, get it and play it. I'm also providing a timestamp to skip this section too, just because I really don't want to have spoiling this game on my conscience. So we're actually going in 3, 2, 1. There is no way to save the Harthians. The sun has reached the end of its life cycle. They were dealt a bad hand of evolving on a doomed planet. They're all going to die, and there's nothing that can be done about it. Nobody would believe a doomsayer either. I mean, who would believe somebody saying the world is going to end in 16 minutes? And even if they do believe you, what is there to be done? This is a brutal realization. I wanted so badly to hold out hope that there was still something unanswered that could save them. Like, I mean, the ancient aliens came here for a reason, right? This isn't their native system. I mean, they're seeking something, so the only thing left to do at this point is to find the anomaly that they were looking for, the eye of the universe. Speaking of this ancient alien species, they are all dead. They've been dead for a long time. Throughout the game, you can find hundreds of their corpses, and most of them look like they were going through their daily lives in multiple facilities, cities, and some on expeditions, sifting through the bodies of the dead juxtaposed with their writing, much of which has very fun sprinkles of humor that your very literal translator has trouble picking up well, creates a genuine sense of loss, which mixes with rage when you learn that they were trying to cause your star to go nova. They knew more life could evolve here, so why would they try to do something so dangerous? And does it have to do with why it's going nova now? Will we get to know? I mean, they all died before things came to fruition, apparently. If you don't finish the game, especially after getting many of these realizations, then it is similar to the unfinished puzzle feeling of Never Known Men, but all of the threads I brought up do have concrete ways to follow them and things to look for. Anyway, on to part 4. The nature of Outer Wild struggle evolves each playthrough as the player learns more information, eventually leading to the realization that it's not just the end of your star, it's the end of the universe. There won't be another generation here either. All the Harthians will die, and unlike the alien species before you, they won't be remembered. The only thing that can be done is observe the thing that the aliens were looking for, the eye of the universe. This is similarly bleak to I Who Have Never Known Men. Both stories involve the total death of a community, although they play out in ways that affected my emotional response significantly. For Outer Wilds, you get used to the death and revival of these people quickly, and the assumption that you'll save them through your actions is just expected. When it becomes clear that that won't happen, each interaction with other Harthians has a spike of guilt, that you wish you could pile a few into your ship to save them, but there is no saving them. The universe is ending along with the stars dying. Compared to the slow death of each individual in the community of I Who Have Never Known Men, the sudden realization and dawning of implications has its own feeling of a gut punch, but each death of a community feels markedly different. Anyway, on to part 5. We have the puzzle without enough pieces. In Outer Wilds, we've been left with a lot of questions, and I haven't even brought them all up yet. There's still more, like what could have wiped out an entire advanced species? How did we survive that? Why did the sun explode? Are your people doomed to the same fate, killed while going about their daily lives without a chance to react? And why did the alien statue give you time loop powers? The questions about the nature of the world are similar in number to I Who Have Never Known Men's. I mean, we have a world where it's obvious that people with more technological means and know-how did some really big things. But the difference is the ability to find answers. In Outer Wilds, if you have the time and energy to hunt them down, you can track down each loose end. If you complete a playthrough, each question that I posed should have an answer, but the truths of the situation, that you were born at the end of the universe, is just what it is. It's bleak, and answers are the only catharsis here. There isn't the same intentional cruelty of imprisonment followed by the opposite uncaring abandonment in I Who Have Never Known Men. Instead, it's just the finality of a universe that can't continue onward, and the weight of what those last moments will bring. Lastly, we have the way the darkest moments of each story reinforce the narrative. For Outer Wilds, we should talk about Escape Shuttle 3. When the alien race first came to the solar system, drawn by the Eye of the Universe's signal, they appeared inside of a hell known as the Dark Bramble, a mess of vines and fog that is nearly impossible to navigate without a signal to track, and the Eye's signal ended as abruptly as it began. With their vessel punctured, they had to escape, and the crew fled into its 3 escape pods. Pods 1 and 2 made it to other planets in the solar system, but Pod 3... Pod 3. The exit they tried to reach was too small for their ship. It was also too small for them when they disembarked and attempted to find it. It was a tiny pod of gnarled spikes, and without enough fuel, they just had to sit and wait for their end. You find this out by following their trail, by the way. You can find Escape Pod 3's signal early in the game, and if you brave the Dark Bramble, and hopefully not get eaten by the locals, you find your way to this scene. This is one of the most striking moments in the game. The unsettling ambience of the Dark Bramble fades away into the requiem for the alien race, and as you read the account of what happened, you can still see the corpses gathered around the seed, hoping against hope until the end that there might be a way to be saved, or, well, figuring out what to do in their last moments. My emotional response here was very similar to how I felt during the first of the cells that the women found in I Who Have Never Known Men. Both evoke the pain of being denied freedom so close to reaching it, and instead forced to waste away knowing that if things had turned out slightly differently, you could have lived. I mean, what that life could have been is up in the air. It could have just been escaping to die suddenly later, or to be in a bigger cage, but I don't think anyone would argue that it would be better than this. This also clearly shows why I Who Have Never Known Men is such a unique story. In Outer Wilds, this right here is one of the bleakest scenes, but there's still 2 other escape pods that each safely landed on other planets, and the Voyagers on board were able to settle new lives. I Who Have Never Known Men, on the other hand, focuses on what it would be like to be this group, to have finality and uncertainty as the main touchstones, and through centering it in the plot and stripping away all else, it is able to explore so much about what humanity means. Lastly, I want to quickly touch on Outer Wilds DLC. One more spoiler warning, please, if you haven't played it. Here you go. Now, the DLC is incredible. It is essentially another Outer Wilds game on its own, but at the end it has a similar situation to the author. Remember that signal from the Eye of the Universe that the alien race was following? Well, there's a reason that it stopped transmitting shortly after it was detected. It turns out a separate alien race had found the Eye of the Universe first, but they didn't like what they saw and they decided to hide it. One amongst them dissented, and after the others entered a long slumber, they snuck out and turned off the jamming device that was blocking the Eye's signal. They were shortly after found and imprisoned unto eternity in a dreamscape at the bottom of a lake, and they would be down there until the end of the universe. But at the end of the universe, they get found by an adventurous Hearthian, and are given a chance to not only share their story after being alone for so long, but see how their actions affected the world. This is simply the most cathartic scene I've ever experienced in a game, and the parallels to I Who Have Never Known Men is clear. The prisoner gets the sort of ending that I hoped for the author. She even said herself, she wanted to be of help to somebody who came across, and having the catharsis provided by having what you pursued in your life be useful to somebody else, to have a tangible effect, is worth so much. I also just want to give a shout out to the entire team at Mobius. I think that they should be proud of what they created, and yeah. Also, Andrew Farlow's music from this scene will always make me cry when it hits at the right time. And with that, we are done with Outer Wilds. Thank you all for coming with me on this one. Welcome back, says the man to himself, because he's very normal about it. Alright, back to the book. With the Outer Wilds section done, I think it's time for us to jump back to discuss the book itself again. So, now that we've explored some other narratives, let's get back to analyzing our author, specifically the important questions she asks throughout the book. There's a few that stuck out to me. The first I'd like to highlight is, quote, "Is there satisfaction in the effort of remembering that provides its own nourishment, and is what one recollects less important than the act of remembering?" End quote. This quote is at the heart of the book, since this book is the author recollecting and gaining nourishment from her memories before the end. I was also fascinated by this, since it's not something I've been able to access easily. I've had a crummy memory much worse than my peers and sibling for most of my adult life. I often don't remember things as well as other people do, and compound this with my parents passing fairly young, and that means I only have one sibling's memories to fill in any of the gaps I have from early childhood, or middle childhood, or late childhood. For me, attempts to remember are often met with frustration and uncertainty. Instead of nourishment, I feel a void where something should have been. With the tools I currently have, it feels much easier to live in the moment and, the world in front of me than spending time sitting in reflection. But I couldn't escape the feeling that something else was going on. I actually went through some proper psychiatric testing during the course of writing this script, and it looks like I have a unique cocktail of anxiety, depression, ADHD, and autism, which probably explains at least part of my memory difficulties. It's interesting to have these revelations about myself after being the normal one for so long in my life, and I'm still unpacking how exactly I feel about it, but I do think the reflection forced by projects like this are good for working through those thoughts. And when forced to reflect when looking into different pieces of media and to record my thoughts, it leaves a tangible path I can follow when I want to remember, and I do get nourishment from that. Jumping back to the author, in terms of narrative, how does this quote interact with the stated purpose of her journal? In the last portion of the account, it was to be a way to live on, even if someone else finds the bunker. I would say that this was an incidental side effect. Discovery through emulation. By mimicking the forwards of others, the author was forced to reflect, and through reflection, found both comfort, regret, and a new purpose, to be remembered and accounted for. This nourishment would indeed fuel the rest of her writings. The other large question that the author ponders is, what does it mean to be human? And how does the culture one is raised in, or lack thereof, come into play? The author went through life completely alienated from the visuals of a world that everybody else knew intimately. The only instrument she heard was a voice. The only food she knew were what were in the bunkers. The only animals she saw with her own eyes were bugs, insects, and birds. This lack of shared knowledge and experiences made the author feel like an alien up until she reflected upon her entire life when she wrote this account. With so much stripped away, we were able to see the heart of what, to the author, makes humanity. My reading it is, to the author, humanity is the drive to continue forward and to find answers to the uncertainty of the world mixed with a need for stability and community, which were often at odds. And the author could have left the other woman much earlier to try to find answers, but instead she chose to remain present, which tapers into the comfort and dullness of routine, and then the dull numbness and spikes of pain of gradual loss. The author could have left earlier and tried to find answers, but it was unlikely that she would have, even if she spent her entire life exploring. She put it aptly. It's a puzzle without enough pieces. I have my own theories as to what happened, but none of them have enough information to make full sense of everything. The questions of where the guards went, why the ones in the bus died apparently immediately, or how power continues to run without power lines all point to some far future technology or a simulated world where things don't need to work by the same rules. I think that trying to untangle the mystery is very interesting. I mean, it's pervasive to every aspect of the book, and could answer the questions of how or why did this happen, but some things simply don't have the capacity to be learned in one's lifetime. Sometimes things are just bigger than what we can do, and we have to make peace with our lack of understanding, which is very painful, especially when that's what's defined your life. The inability to decipher the mystery in this case truly is at the core of the story, and very few stories grapple with this type of conclusion. An ending where only the gesture to continuity being a handwritten book hidden in a bunker after a point of view character's existence ends. It's something staggeringly bleak, and humanity generally believes in legacy, that a piece of us should survive to the future, so the lessons that we garnered during our existence aren't lost, and so experiences that we've had can be shared and hopefully will be seen and understood by future generations. Usually, other stories would only deign to go to the sorts of places I who have never known men has, maybe in some sort of alternate universe or through time travel, in order to show a future that must be prevented. I think what makes this book so hard to find a direct comparison for is that it goes all in on that bleak mundanity. But getting to this extreme bleakness would have taken time and effort from interested parties. A government, company, or organization of some type rounded up these people, imprisoned them somewhere far away, and denied them basic rights for a majority of their lives. And I feel like I've been seeing some of this when I watch the news. So, how does this relate to the real world? At time of writing, I am living in the Twin Cities in Trump's second term. For those who need a reminder, or if you're watching this way in the future, the Trump administration sent thousands of undertrained, overarmed secret police to the Twin Cities as part of a vengeance campaign against blue states during the winter of 2025. Trump's ICE agents also took to breaking and entering multiple homes without warrants to kidnap people and immediately used violence whenever they felt discomfort. They killed Renee Good and Alex Preddy, and injured many others like Julio Cesar Sosa Silos. He was shot but survived, and the offending officers were later found to be lying under oath and put on leave. Personally, I've had to learn how to use Signal, shown up to more protests than I've ever been to in the other years of my life, and I still feel like I have no power against the utter lack of acknowledgement to the suffering caused to other human beings. It's strikingly similar to a book I've read recently. Now, how does this relate to the book I Who Have Never Known Men? Our standard structure isn't designed to be used on something like this. It's not designed to be used on something that isn't a narrative. So this section will be more freeform, but I think the parallels are pretty clear. Let's look into how exactly the prison the author was in could come to be, and let's see what sort of calamity could have taken so many people from their homes. So, I think it's fair to say we're living in some pretty shitty times right now. The current US government wants us to think of others as inhuman to the point where they don't deserve basic necessities or rights. I mean, just look at how migrants and refugees have been incessantly called illegals by certain outlets or people in the government, and shoved into detention facilities like the one in El Paso, Texas, or New Jersey. This includes children and people without criminal records, even though the administration said that they would only target the bad ones. This should require more oversight, but with the Republican-stacked Supreme Court ruling in Trump's favor at light speed using the shadow docket, there's no accountability. Even Congress is stacked with Republicans, and they don't really have a want to limit their perfect executive's power. This has emboldened the administration, and given enough time and resources, Trump and his cronies would gladly create more of these types of facilities if it meant that they could continue to get rid of inconvenient people. In these facilities, we have a type of community that we've seen before, an eclectic group with varied nationalities, experience, and ages sent to a facility due to a calamity, although it turns out that this isn't one-to-one because the behavior of the guards in, looking at specifically El Paso, is even less humane. Quote, detainees struggle to obtain medication and health care, lose concerning amounts of weight because of a lack of food, and live in fear of private security guards known to use force to put down disturbances. The ceilings in the windowless tents leak when it rains, and detainees only see sunlight during brief outings once or twice a week to a cramped recreation yard. This is abhorrent. It's a travesty that something like this is happening to fellow human beings in our country. Hell, remember how the guards and I Who Have Never Known Men would be very on top of watching for suicides to ensure that all 40 inmates stayed alive? Well, the guards at El Paso bet on inmates committing suicide. Quote, at one point, Ramsing said he overheard a security guard talking about bets made among the staff over which detainee would be the next to die by suicide. The guard said he had paid $500 into a pool, with the total pot riding on the outcome. The talk was particularly jarring, he said, because he had contemplated suicide himself. End quote. It feels callous to be comparing the situation of real humans to a fictional account. But also, it's surreal to see an even worse form of internment present in my own country in this day and age. It is hard to express the ways that I feel myself needing to become more emotionally closed off to not buckle under the weight of it all. The main difference between this life and the book is that the people detained are doing everything they can to be heard, and there are people outside of the situation that are fighting to try to change things. There have been highly publicized wins like Liam Conejo Ramos. He's a 5-year-old asylum seeker who was detained with his father on January 20th after he came home from preschool. After 2 weeks in the detention facility, he and his father were released, but this is the exception to the rule due to how high-profile their case was. In more cases, it's detention without end in inhumane conditions, which have reached a breaking point. The living situation is simply untenable, so many of those within multiple facilities have started staging hunger strikes, which have sparked protests outside, with ones at like Delaney Hall, New Jersey, gaining the most attention. This sucks. I don't know how else to say it. It sucks really fucking badly that pride is being taken in enacting this cruelty, that whenever anyone in power is questioned, that they'll say something about going after the bad ones as if they aren't the worst of the worst for disregarding their humanity and decency for power and status. The words of Gabriela Fuentes, whose husband was stolen from her, are sadly familiar. Quote, we're all human. We're all people. Just because we're Hispanic does not mean that we need to be treated like this. End quote. I am planning on donating a portion of this video's proceeds to RACES, a nonprofit organization that provides legal support and education to immigrant communities targeted by ICE. If you feel strongly as I do on this issue, I recommend you do some research into nonprofits and donate yourself. And with that, that's everything wrapped up. Take care of yourself.
Fuck the government. We have bolt cutters. Oh.
Time and time again, you will be my only friend. Although the tides of time have gone and torn us apart, time and time again, you were still
My beard looks really weird right now, and I don't know why. Like, look at, oh, it's mirrored. On this side, if I do this, suddenly it's there, now it's gone, now it's there, now it's gone, now it's there, now it's gone. Weird stuff.